Alrighty, everybody. Thank you and welcome to How Does ASM Fit In Within the Vulnerability Management Process, a webinar discussing the relationship between attack surface management and vulnerability management as a whole. I am joined today by two lovely guests, Eoin Keary and Jess Burn, who I have no problem allowing them to introduce themselves in just a second. So we do have a list of defined questions that we're going to go over today. We do have a little bit of a time schedule here. We're going for about 35 to 40 minutes. That being said, we are taking questions on the question and answer feature on the Zoom webinar. So it's a good time right now. We're going to let some people file in, allow Jess and Eoin to introduce themselves, give us all some time for the audience to come and join us. And with that, I will hand it off to you, Jess, and just let you do a little introduction.
Sure. So hi, everyone. I'm Jess Burn. I'm a senior analyst on the security and risk team at Forrester, and I cover a number of things, one of which is attack surface management, but I also write for the role of the CISO with a specific focus on talent management. So hiring, training, retention, and then I also cover incident response and email security. So all of these things sort of fit together pretty well when it comes to protecting an organization. So I'm thrilled to be here today.
Well, thank you. We're thrilled to have you, Jess. And then with that, I'll hand it over to you, Eoin, and give us a nice little introduction on yourself.
Hey, Eoin Keary is my name, CEO of Edgescan. Not just an empty suit CEO, was author of the OS testing guide, OS code review guide, was a developer when I was a young, good-looking lad. Those kinds of changes you can see. I have very much, been a pen tester, software security person for like 20 years. Super happy to be here, Brian. Thanks for having me.
Well, thank you very much, Eoin. And I myself am the new business and partnerships development lead for the US here at Edgescan. Thank you guys so much for allowing me to moderate this beautiful event. And with that, I think we should have given everybody enough time to jump in, kind of get our audience going. I'll start my timer up over here so we can make sure to get all these lovely questions in on time. And with that, Jess, I'm going to direct our first question over to you.
Okay.
And that question is, has attack surface management been defined yet, or is it still evolving?
That is a great question. I believe this is still an evolving space, but tools to discover an organization's digital footprint, have been around and under various names for probably over 5 years. They've only recently coalesced around the term attack surface management within the last, I think, 2 or 3 years, and they're now starting to split into a few categories, one of which is external attack surface management. And EASM is evolving too, right? What started out as scanning and discovery of internet-facing assets and their exposures is now really starting to add greater value with prioritization. So it is still evolving, given the amount of vulnerability debt that most firms are trying to pay down, prioritization is key because an avalanche of just new discovered assets with no indication of the severity of the vulnerabilities or the misconfigurations or any of the sensitive data that's contained just adds more confusion to an already clogged remediation queue. So now EAS tools or ASM tools, if we want to just call it that, they include the ability to layer context onto discovery alerts and via things like vulnerability scoring frameworks, threat intelligence, asset ownership, associated business processes, and other actionable evidence to support prioritization and remediation decisions. So I think that's where I see things evolving. The value is getting greater as these tools continue to mature.
Oh, that's a beautiful take, and I do hear a lot about context and a story behind these different vulnerabilities and these different assets that we have to define. And when I do go and sit down and listen to CISOs talk, that is something that I hear a lot about. Is we need that context, we need that story behind it to really show us exactly what we're dealing with on the external surface. In my experience. And then, Eoin, did you have anything to add there?
Yeah, I suppose the idea of ASM is. I sort of completely agree with Jess. If you think about it in the old pen testing parlance, enumeration, right? It's recon, it's step one of pen testing, it's OSINT, open source intelligence. For me, ASM has evolved greatly past that, but it's the paradigm is, the ASM paradigm is in effect having automation, having continuous real-time visibility. I've always been a believer in the idea that you can't secure what you can't see.
Absolutely.
So but it is certainly, to answer the question, is it evolving? 100%. ASM is moving more from just visibility, as Jess said, in terms of threat intel, in terms of vulnerability management, in terms of like try to keep track, like particularly with cloud environments, trying to keep track with sort of constant flux, that type of thing. Some solutions, have introduced a light vulnerability management piece to their products. I'm not sure what light vulnerability management is, but it's moving in that direction. I think it's ASM could be the consolidation eventually of the idea of enumeration in a continuous way, plus vulnerability management, and hopefully following with pen testing as a service, and that's sort of the convergence of all those things eventually. But a lot of it is about scale, frequency, doing it continuously, and being able to keep pace with change. So yeah, there's a lot of work to do. I think there's a couple of things as well, which I'd love to hear what Jess, we'll cover it probably during the session. Application enumeration. I think you can do tons of depth with applications in terms of ASM, more than just saying, here's an application. And the other piece which we've been working on in Edgescan is API discovery. So it's the idea of trying to find APIs that clients maybe don't know they have, which is you can do that in numerous ways. But yeah, it is evolving, and it's an exciting area to be in.
No, and thank you very much, Eoin, for sharing. And with that, we will move on to our next question. Again, I do want to remind everybody in attendance that if anybody has anything they'd like to know, if they have any questions, comments, concerns about anything we're going on over here, we do have the question and answer feature in the chat. We will be getting to all those questions at the end. So please, please, please let us know what you're thinking. And with that, I'll direct this question to you, Eoin. How does attack surface management fit in within a vulnerability management process?
Yeah, I probably covered a bit of that answer when I was ranting on with the first piece. So it needs to be core with vulnerability management. It's sort of something we've been doing at Edgescan since early 2017. It's been the idea of visibility. It's the idea of knowing what you have. I think a lot of the breaches you'll see, you've heard of, even ransomware attacks, some of the high-profile ones, etc. A lot of those attacks weren't particularly, in terms of the initial breach, they weren't particularly complex, or they
weren't a sophisticated attack.
They weren't sophisticated, exactly right. It could have been an open 3389 port, or an RDP, or a remote login port. It could have been a database or an S3 bucket sitting out, that nobody knew about. So if they knew about it, it probably wouldn't be there. So I think ASM, needs to fit in, because if you know what you have, you can apply, you can focus your vulnerability management efforts, right? So I think that's a very important part of the whole paradigm. The other thing around it is, and Jess mentioned it in the previous question, is accuracy and context. So I think ASM can give a lot of clarity and a lot of fidelity to vulnerability management. It can give additional contextual information when you find a vulnerability, when a vulnerability is discovered. But in saying that, vulnerability management, the output from that needs to be reasonably accurate in order, because if you wind up with false positives and stuff, and you have an ASM piece as well to your solution, it might get a little bit confusing. I suppose one of the last things around ASM and vulnerability management, when I talk about vulnerability management, I'm not talking about device security, network traditional. I'm talking about AST, or application security testing, AppSec, combined with network and host and cloud. So the idea of full stack vulnerability management. And I think, a sort of a broad view ASM solution coupled with that could give you the ability, because some vulnerabilities aren't CVE based. Some vulnerabilities aren't sort of SQL injections. Some vulnerabilities are just exposures, right?
Yeah.
They could be, as I mentioned, a remote desktop service just sitting out there on the internet that somebody didn't firewall up, or a misconfigured firewall. It doesn't need to be a patching related issue. And ASM is perfect for trying to find those things.
Beautiful. And Jess, anything to add there?
Yeah, I mean, I agreed with all of that. I think it's a pretty natural fit with most firms' vulnerability management processes, because ASM can hook into things like CMDBs and ticketing systems very easily. And these solutions deliver really kind of a more, to Eoin's point, a thorough understanding of what assets are most exposed and how they're connected. And this provides the security pros with the necessary data to prioritize these things that are most likely exploitable, and pinpoint where countermeasures can reduce the risk. So adding it to the vulnerability management process is valuable. That is, of course, if everyone is agreed upon the process and collaborating well, of course, and we can talk more about that in a little bit.
No, and that was an absolutely fantastic segue right there, Jess. You kind of just did my job a little bit for me, because our next question is, what is the value of combining attack surface management and vulnerability management? So thank you so much for leading me into that, and I'll pass you back the baton to show us the value of combining these two things.
Yeah, so for me, it's that visibility and the potential for greater collaboration. This is something that I write a lot about and talk a lot about, because I talk about people, right? So especially with security staff, but this also matters for relations between teams. So people coming together on process is so critical. We recently saw it, and hopefully we won't have to see it again around the holidays again this year, but we saw people coming together around Log4j, right?
Yep.
But it shouldn't take an emergency to bring people together, right?
Agreed.
If we want to practice proactive and preventative security instead of, only coming together in a crisis, we would assemble working groups to air out those conflicting priorities and objectives in advance of an emergency. And we can do this with for exposure and for vulnerability management, just like we do for incident response. I'm drawing a lot from my coverage of incident response to think about this. And one of our program recommendations for CISOs for this year was to form a vulnerability response team that's similar to an incident response team, and run tabletop exercises and other drills to prepare for another Log4j. I mean, we've had December surprises for 2 years in a row now. So I think it's important. And that way you form it, you get these folks together, they're forced to collaborate, and hopefully that carries over into the downtime, into peacetime, if you will, as well. Because again, it's getting tired to have security ops and IT ops always, at each other with their conflicting priorities. And I think it's up to CISOs and CIOs and their direct reports that head those departments to just stop this, and kind of, I think, forming these working groups, forming these groups that can actually, we actually recommend an attack surface management program, not necessarily even just a tool. And again, that goes into that group that could be that emergency vulnerability response group.
That's really good.
Thank you very much. That's incredibly insightful. I love collaboration on all levels. And again,
Me too.
It's all these buzzwords that I keep hearing tossed around, like appetite for risk. I hear that all the time. And I actually heard a great collaboration the other day from a couple different CISOs talking about how one department could have a different appetite for risk than another department, but you're all in the same company. And that just goes to exactly what you're saying, which is we need to speak with one another. We need to be able to prioritize together and get on the same page. And so without me talking too much, Eoin, did you have anything to add to the value of combining attack surface management and vulnerability management?
Yeah, for me, it's a little bit more nuts and bolts, hands in the weeds, but it's just definitely aligns with what Jess was saying. I mentioned the idea of continuous visibility. That's important. Real-time visibility is important. And why I say real-time is if you have a lot of cloud, some organizations now have tons of cloud endpoints and stuff on the web, and it's spinning up and down, based on demand, and it's being deployed by large global development teams and then ripped down again, et cetera, et cetera. Sometimes just left there and forgotten about. So the idea of combining ASM and vulnerability management is important, because we need to continuously see what's out there, and then we need to be able to target our vulnerability management part of the whole solution, so we're not missing out on anything. And what you see is, attack surface management particularly needs to have some sort of a cloud awareness or native cloud awareness. So, and the reason I say that is because with cloud, we don't have static DNS anymore, right? Our IPs are changing continuously, things are shifting, the sound's moving, and therefore we need to continuously have a feedback loop between vulnerability management and ASM. So as your environment changes and as the landscape shifts, you need to be resighting. You're sort of like a sniper. You need to resight your gun every few minutes and make sure you have everything in the picture. And I think those two things combined are pretty important. I think something that's finally, as I mentioned it as well earlier on, but the idea of API security as well. The idea of, there's lots of terms what API security is, lots of views. In my view, what I'm talking about is API pen testing and API finding vulnerabilities in APIs. But again, if you have a very dynamic global landscape, keeping pace with change, keeping pace where APIs are deployed, etc. A lot of APIs aren't apparent if you don't know where to look, and some of them you won't really be able to discover them unless you do a decent level of ASM. So, and if you don't know about it, you're not going to be testing it, and therefore, somebody else might find it and test it for you in sort of in a negative sense. So the combination of the two of them is very important, and I think a lot of it is development and deployment, and all that stuff has moved to the point where it's not a big deal to deploy. It's not a big deal to sort of add widgets to systems on a regular basis, right? It's not like we're in the waterfall world of software development. And deployment world is continuous deployment, continuous integration. And very much then, if we want to keep pace with that as security practitioners, as people to try and make organizations safe, we need to keep pace with this changing landscape and let ASM in effect do that to a certain degree, but have a feedback loop into some sort of vulnerability management or integration into a vulnerability management system, which realigns the targets on a continuous basis. So I think they're very important. They're great cousins. Yeah.
Well, thanks so much, Eoin. And that was beautifully done. And it actually, this is all kind of leading up to our next question. And I have to give some credit to somebody in our audience named Antonio, because he threw in a question and I promised everybody we would address them at the end. But this actually kind of falls perfectly in with what our next question is. So our next question, and I'm going to direct this to you, Jess, is How can attack surface management be used against cloud assets given the continuous flux of endpoints? But beautifully, Antonio also asked, will attack surface management be able to work with cloud resources in the future? So I'm going to give you a little two-part question and answer here and hand it off to you and address it as you please.
Okay, great. Well, so yes, I think many organizations got themselves into a bit of a sprawl situation, right? Starting, I guess, around 2020 with the accelerated migration to the cloud, with anywhere work, moving to, SaaS for everything. And many didn't, I've heard this from our CISO clients and security leader clients that I speak to, many didn't stop to clean up and consolidate after the move because of the pace of business. It just didn't let them. So, and they couldn't police other parts of the organization as well.
100%, yeah.
Yeah, and then their supply chain partners were doing the same thing, and then connecting to these organizations with the same sprawl on their end. Everybody was moving fast. And on top of that is the increase in shadow IT, right? No one was taking the time to bring in security to assess software as a service apps, or whose APIs are where. They just sign the check and go, and data is flowing through those apps, through partner and supply chain apps, through cloud infrastructure, all of which may be, unfortunately, unknown to security and IT. So ASM right now really helps rein in cloud sprawl, and research interviews for our report, which has my favorite title that I've ever come up with, Find and Cover Your Assets with Attack Surface Management. We found, sorry, I couldn't resist it. And I can't believe it got through editing. But we found that organizations that are using ASM tools discovered on average 30% more assets than they knew they had. And these are often cloud assets. And some companies we spoke to found closer to 50% more. So, that's kind of terrifying. So it really does help you right now rein in cloud sprawl and help work in cloud environments.
Well, thank you. So you're saying even right now, we don't really need to look to the future. It's already helping us rein in these cloud resources. Oh, beautiful. And then Eoin, anything to add on that?
Yeah, I think the difference is cloud is dynamic. So when I was a kid in IT, if people could say, what's that server, what's it doing, what's running on it? Now anybody with the right permissions can spin up 100 servers and do whatever they want, in a very loose environment, right? Theoretically speaking. And those servers could be connected to other things, and they could also be exposed. And they may be using an image that isn't a goal, it's like another most recent image, or it could have some CVEs, whatever it may be. So the idea, the cloud challenge is around sort of keeping pace with the change, keeping pace with the ease of deployment by the business in order to deploy more technology as is required. Okay, so the idea of continuous flux. In terms of ASM, how we do it, and how we think about it is to do it effectively. So native integration is important, which means that in the terms of Edgescan ASM, we're connecting to the tenant of the cloud, of our client's cloud, and at any point in time, like a CMDB, we're keeping track of what's live at any point in time. So if you know what's live at any point in time from the tenant standpoint, or you can in effect then refocus the sort of the scope of your ASM, so you're keeping pace with this sort of idea of spinning up and tearing down and that type of thing. So what results is, again, we're talking about feedback loops. You can use that, then you can use that again for this sort of dynamic list, shall we say, of endpoints. There could be thousands of them. You can actually then feed that into vulnerability management, such that as something pops, it's automatically going to get, it's automatically going to be under, it's going to be managed with vulnerability management. It's going to be assessed. If it gets spun down, it will drop off the list. So there's a bit of efficiency there as well. It exists now, but any ASM, which in my view, which requires to be cloud friendly from a technology standpoint, needs to have an endpoint with a CMDB or some sort of integration with a cloud tenant in order to keep track of the constant changing landscape in the cloud.
Beauteous. Thank you very much, Eoin. I appreciate that. And I love this theme that's starting to arise here, where we're talking a lot about visibility and we're talking a whole lot about prioritization when it comes to attack surface management and vulnerability management, which again brings me to my next question. And Eoin, this is going to be directed towards you.
Sure.
How does risk-based prioritization work with vulnerability management and attack surface management?
That's an interesting one, right? So we have the idea of vulnerabilities, right? So, they can be injection-based OWASP vulnerabilities. We have the idea of CVEs, right? So patched issues, right? Patching issues. So these are known exploitable things. In Edgescan, we leverage the CISA Kev. One of our clever clients suggested it to us a number of maybe a year ago, and we implemented it. So when we find vulnerabilities, we map it to the CISA known exploitable vulnerability catalog. So as the vulnerabilities are discovered, if they're on the catalog, they get a higher prioritization. The risk is dynamic. But their vulnerabilities per se being CVEs, they're known vulnerabilities. But with ASM, we're also looking for things which may not have a vulnerability associated, right? Or I see an identifier associated with them, such as maybe an exposed database, an exposed admin console with default credentials, an exposed bucket, a cloud bucket, an exposed remote login, an insecure mail server. It doesn't necessarily mean it has a CVE. It's been patched, but it just hasn't been configured. Or an insecure, ACL or firewall or something, some endpoint device, virtual or not. So ASM is very good at picking up that stuff quickly. Most ASM solutions you can configure them to say, if you find anything other than what good looks like, you define what good looks like. And if you find anything other than that, let me know. Ping me, raise a ticket, send me an email, whatever it may be, right? So that's something we've instituted a lot of, in the Edgescan space. But the thing is that not all vulnerabilities are equal as well. So the idea around prioritization in vulnerability management and how that maps to ASM is some ASM items are discovered are without a doubt a high priority. So and particularly exposed services, or maybe systems, maybe rogue systems, maybe systems we didn't know we had, and they look a bit odd and they have very high ports open, weird shadow IT stuff, right? Without a doubt, I don't need to look much more into it. I'm going to start to ask questions and maybe either get it shut down, fixed, firewalled off, whatever. So ASM can give you very much a black and white view of that. And then the priority piece as well. So there's, I don't want to get too much into vulnerability management 101, but the idea of understanding the context. So, in ASM, if you can tag your assets with risk and business risk and priority, well, therefore, if something pops up in ASM on a tagged asset, for example, or something you've nominated to be important to your business, obviously, then you can raise that priority or set up a particular alert or something like that. So the prioritization is important, and one of the reasons for that is with ASM, when you're out of the box, when you get it going before you fine tune it, or if you have a very, very big estate, you might get a lot of pings, you might get a lot of flags. And to be able to prioritize particular types of flags is the first level of filtering sort of the data. So you know, prioritization is very much around, well, I can only do so much with the people I have, in the time I have, and the budget I have. So let's fix the stuff that matters to our business, as opposed to fixing all the ones. We will never fix all the vulnerabilities. As the man says, not all vulnerabilities are equal. So prioritization in that sense is pretty important.
Absolutely. And then Jess, I'll redirect to you.
Yeah, I'm going to bring it back to people again, right? Because I still think that this is where ASM can really help with risk-based prioritization, because it sort of eliminates some of the arguments, right? These competing priorities, sometimes a fair amount of animus between security and IT operations and security and development teams, and it's stemming from their core missions, right? Security for security and availability for IT and speed for development gets in the way. So, and a lot of this is brought to the surface when the groups have to work together to remediate vulnerabilities. And though I believe a single pane of glass is sort of a nice little myth, I think ASM tools can come close, right? So because the telemetry from the diverse asset types, the integrated workflows from IT and security and even development can at least provide, if everybody can agree to work off of it, as a crucial single source of truth. And they can act as that shared resource from which these teams can define and contextualize assets and prioritize and assign and then ultimately remediate the discovered vulnerabilities and other exposures. But one of the things I often caution our clients to do before you go out and pick a tool is to get your house in order and ready yourself for the influx, to Eoin's point earlier, of assets and misconfigurations that you're bound to find once you implement one of these tools. And you have to work with these colleagues. Again, if you have put that working group together for emergencies, work with the same group to ensure that your vulnerability and patch management workflows and the systems you have in place to track them, everything is optimized, and that the roles, responsibilities, and SLAs between the teams are ironed out, agreed to, you know, everybody's management is agreed to it. Because again, the last thing you want is a pile of work without a smooth process to get through all of it.
No, and I love, and thank you so much for that, Justin. I love how you keep taking it back to people, because we have this beautiful dynamic here of like the tech side and then the people side. So thank you very much for that. And then that actually brings us to our last defined question for the day. So once again, I'm going to remind the audience, please get your questions in before we wrap up, and we'll be happy to address them. I do have one in the queue right now, so please come on, let's get them in here. And then Jess, our final defined question for the day is going to start with you. It is, what are the key aspects buyers should look for when shopping for attack surface management?
Yeah. So I think buyers should understand what they believe their key use cases are for ASM when they're looking for a tool or solution. You know, where is your greatest need? Is it that asset discovery, not knowing what you don't know, but you know, maybe you have some suspicions about the level of cloud sprawl? That's usually the biggest driver for the Forrester clients that I've spoken with. But we talked about this a little bit earlier. I'm seeing interest in other use cases that expand beyond security and IT and into GRC and even legal, right? Because think about M&A due diligence. The true security posture of an acquisition or a supply chain partner, even for third-party risk management, is largely unknown until the organizations attempt to integrate their systems in some fashion. So combining security programs that are not aligned and control environments that are not aligned can really increase opportunities for attackers to pivot from acquired entities or third-party systems that are now connected to the bigger fish that they were probably looking for. So during M&A due diligence and during third-party risk assessments, many firms rely on pretty static things, and I'm not going to throw too much shade, but you know, to cyber risk scoring services, right, or risk rating services, and that again is just a point in time, and you know, the CISOs I speak with, kind of the bane of their existence because of the errors that are in there. So you know, the continual value of continual monitoring of exposures for yourselves, for your third parties during the M&A process, I think is one of the things that we're seeing, like the use cases that we're hearing so much more about in terms of attack surface management. Again, that expands to other teams. So you have other opportunities to work and use this same single source of truth with GRC, with legal, you know, with others. So I think it can be pretty powerful beyond the initial use case that most people bring it in for.
Well, thank you so much, Jess. And I learned a lot right there. So thank you very much for that. I know that's an area of your expertise. And then I'll redirect to Mr. Keary.
Yeah, you know what? There's some really good stuff what Jess said there in terms of the use of that not data but information from ASM integration. So one of the things, you know, I'd ask myself if you're shopping for ASM is, do I need ASM? Do I need vulnerability management? Do I need both? You know, currently some ASM doesn't do vulnerability management. It does visibility. But then again, as I said, without visibility, it's hard to secure your business or your organization, right? So something that I find is very useful and important, particularly the way we talked about change, the rate of change is real-time ASM. So some ASM solutions have both. Some of them have, you know, just go out and crawl the entire internet and persist it into a database, but it's not particularly real-time. And then the other systems are real-time scanning your assets, you know, so as something is found within seconds, you know about it. So there's a bit of a difference there in terms of just conversations if you're looking to shop for an ASM solution. The other thing is around full stack. ASM isn't just about ports and protocols and firewalls. You know, it's about web applications and APIs. It's about the full stack, because everything is your attack surface. Your attack surface is everything that you have on the internet. It's not just. Then again, you could argue that your attack surface can be people as well and all that, but let's not go there today, right?
No.
Accuracy is important, right? So, and I think there is a question. I was just peeking at the questions there. There's one around accuracy. So ASM accuracy. I find most ASM systems are reasonably accurate. I have seen integrations, and I have seen ASM systems which are pertaining to say that this website is your website, and actually it was owned by maybe the Chinese government. So it's the last thing you want to be putting into your VM program is a site that you don't own, right? So, you know, if you're going to pull ASM data and automatically put it into the scope of your vulnerability management program in a dynamic way, you want to be pretty sure that you own the sites that are being you know, consumed dynamically and automatically. I think that's important as well. Integration. So what Jess said as well, Jess talked about the idea of using that data for more than just cyber, legal, M&A, all that type of thing. Any good ASM solution, in my view, should have tons of integration points. You know, I think we believe in Edgescan that, you know, the sort of the mantra is integrate or die. You know, you need to integrate with complementary and competing solutions. You need to be able to share data. You know, no one solution, unfortunately, can do everything. And some solutions do things in a better and maybe a different way and more suited to the problem that's at hand. So integrations and events and alerts are very important. Customizable alerts as well. So as you know, as the ASM does its thing, you know, you can be made aware, or your team can be made aware, or depending on what the item is, depending on what the event is, the notification can go to the right team or the right group, the right business unit. I think that's an important aspect as well. I mentioned about cloud and keeping pace with cloud. So another thing I think is important is native cloud integration. It's the ability to consume cloud directly from the tenant, the cloud, and then being able to match that with what's on the external surface on the internet. So I think that's a pretty important. Or CMDB, as Jess alluded to as well. You know, and then there's a few other things as well, like correlation with vulnerability management is important. You know, correlation, ASM correlating with things like EDR, with vulnerability management, even with SIM systems, SIM systems, or, you know, sort of some sort of monitoring solution, I think can provide a lot of context. Rather than seeing an anomaly on its own, you know, all of a sudden you'll have this sort of wealth of color around it, which may help make a decision. Because bottom line is people have to make a decision on what to do, and we don't want to shut down something or spend time and effort on something that maybe isn't that big of a deal, but it may look like a big deal. So I think that those would be the main things I'm thinking about. Yeah.
Well, thank you very much, Eoin. And with that, that brings us to the end of our defined questions here. And we do have a handful coming up from the audience. And with the first one, I'm going to direct this over to you, Jess. From Andrew Bromberg, he asks, do the panelists see value in the integration of attack surface management with an XDR? We see vendors such as IBM and Trend making this use case.
Yeah, I do see value, right? Especially with the accuracy of it. XDR is great in that you can bring a number of different forms of telemetry into the system to actually look for patterns and then make a decision about response, right? Email also feeds in there, and that's again one of the number one ways that attacks can happen through phishing. So when you're looking at unknown sites, unknown assets, vulnerabilities, and that information is in with XDR, it paints a much better picture for the SOC analyst as to what's happening, and it will probably allow people to either thwart breaches or declare them earlier than they would have otherwise. So yeah, I think this is something that should absolutely feed into anyone's XDR system.
Beauteous. And then, do you have anything to add to that?
No, Jess is spot on. It's about providing color. And fidelity, and I think it's not just XDR, it's SIEM systems if people still claim to use them, or it can be lots of monitoring solutions where if you just get more decent accurate data and you can paint another layer of color on top of that picture, it gives you a better idea. Context is king, I think.
Beautiful. Thank you very much. And then, Eoin, I have a really quick one for you, which is, what is the false positive rate with these attack surface management tools we're seeing, if there is any?
I can't speak to what it is, but I can tell you where I've seen it go wrong. And I've seen it go wrong in terms of when we get to EASM or discovery. Sometimes it gets it wrong and it starts telling you that some subdomains are either yours, but maybe are that they've been taken over, or that some websites are yours, but maybe they're not. So you can get anomalies like that sometimes, which can be dangerous because you may start doing security testing automatically on somebody else's stuff. But in terms of, I think you get some quirky stuff as well sometimes around some sort of cryptography and SSL, and also with some certain types of WAFs or firewalls where the ASM solution is misunderstanding what it's seeing, based on because there's a firewall there sort of trying to confuse it, which can make some ASMs go a bit nutty. But I think it's all technology, right? And there will be times where you employ ASM, and it will be a bit quirky in certain conditions, and you just have to sort of either work around that, maybe dumb it down, or accept that issue is there. Well, ASM generally, in terms of discovery and enumeration and detection, is probably vastly more accurate than a lot of the vulnerability management products we see out there. So, yeah.
Well, thank you very much, Eoin. I appreciate that. And then, Jess, my next question is actually very well suited for you, and I'm very excited to hand this over to you. So, where should companies start their attack surface management journey? Should they focus on their known assets, or should they leap into as broad of a snapshot as they can possibly get?
I think I'm gonna have to go with the latter, right? Because again, you can't secure what you can't see and what you don't know about, to Owen's point earlier. So I think getting a handle on what you're dealing with in terms of cloud sprawl, in terms of shadow IT, is really important. It might seem overwhelming, but you need to know how all of that connects to your known assets, right? And that was maybe where APIs come in. So I would try to get that much broader view. But again, I would caution people to have that working group together, be ready for what you're going to find before you do this. So try to get some of the political stuff out of the way, get that solid group together, and then go for it and get that broader view.
And I love how you continually bring this back to people, because I feel like sometimes, especially in my experience, when it comes to cyber, I feel like sometimes I get weighed so much up in the technical aspect of it that I almost forget about the interaction of the people that's so necessary to overcome these problems.
Well, and I'm coming at this from working for nearly a decade with CISOs, right? Even before I was an analyst, I was an advisor to a CISO group within Forrester, and we almost never talked about technology. We talked about people, process, and oversight before we talked about technology, because that's where CISOs and their teams need to have influence, and we talk a lot about influence as well. So that's sort of always sort of running through my research, regardless of whether it's about a specific technology or about other things. So yeah.
No, and I love that. Thank you very much, Jess. And now, ladies and gents, we do have our last question provided by the audience. So if you guys want to sneak one more, and we do have a little bit of time. And again, Jess, I'll hand this one right off to you, okay?
Yep.
So our last question right now is, could we see a point in the future where attack surface management and vulnerability management capabilities could be merged together instead of becoming two separate products or entities?
Oh, absolutely. I think it's already happening. You know, I think attack surface management is really ripe for consolidation or absorption into a number of different tech categories. I don't even know if external attack surface management specifically is going to stand alone for a long time. I think people want to consolidate their tech, and I think this is also just a core capability of vulnerability management, IT asset management, breach and attack simulation, detection and response, you name it, incident response. So I think yes, I think there's a time when you can see this merged, and I think it's economical, you know, in a way to do so.
Thank you very much. And then Eoin, did you have anything to add?
Yeah, the question was in the future. Yeah, I could be smart and say wait till Q1 23 and we'll have it done, but I won't. You know, it's something we've been doing. What we used to call it continuous asset profiling in 2017, before it was before the word term ASM was sort of a thing, and then we rebranded. You know, the feature of Edgescan as ASM, obviously, because everybody else called it that. We wanted to, you know, be with the gang. But very much, I think it's an inevitability, right? I think it's something that, you know, visibility and enumeration is something that we've been doing for 20 years. You know, if you ask anybody that does pen testing, you know, first thing is we map out the battleground, right? You know, we map out all the nooks and crannies and see what's there. You know, because what are we doing? We're looking at the attack surface. So yeah, it's a natural progression, and it's something that our product development team are working on feverishly to have something pretty cool released by the first quarter of 23. So yeah, is my answer. So
Thanks,
sorry
man.
for the plug, Brian, but
oh man, I thought you might sneak that in there, but well, that brings us to the end of all of our questions. We got everything handled by the audience. If anybody out there, we didn't get to a question, or you guys are still thinking about something, please feel free to connect with myself, Eoin, or Jess, even on LinkedIn. You can always ask me a question. Door's always open. I'll get back to you, I promise. With that, we do have a handful of webinars coming out over the next few months. And the last thing I want to do is say a big old thank you to Jess Burn for joining us today. A huge thank you to Eoin Keary. It was a beautiful merge of both of your perspectives from the tech side and from the people side. I learned a lot. It was an absolute pleasure being here. And thank you, everybody, for joining us. We will see you again very soon.
thank you very much.
Thank
See ya.
you.
Thanks, Jess. Bye, Brian.
Bye-bye.